Kia ora.
안녕하세요. Welcome back to Video Drones. If it's your first time here, I'm Hannah
And I'm Nick Hart.
and we review, dissect, analyze, pick out a little bits of trivia, deep dive, gorge ourselves on movies. And this video is probably going to be a little bit longer. It is all about the gem in the crown that was the NZIFF, the New Zealand International Film Festival, which was Decision to Leave by the amazing, incredible Chan-wook. Hope I'm not butchering these names. Just to say, I'm doing my best with these names. I'm probably getting some of them wrong, but
I'll try as well, but
yeah.
I'm probably not going to do it justice. So.
Well, the thing is also, if I've looked it up and I've Googled it, sometimes different parts of Korea and different accents have different ways of saying things.
Yeah,
so.
And there are usually about 10 different videos of how to pronounce something, and they are all different.
Some of them are terrible. They're just so westernized. It's like Park Chan-wook, and I'm like, no, that's not right. So
this is based on what we think it might be the right way of saying it. But...
And yeah, even sometimes when the director is announced in an English-speaking interview, it just sounds all kinds of wrong. So yeah, a little bit of a precursor. There's a lot of amazing, beautiful Korean names that I'm a little bit worried that I might massacre, but I will do my best. So Park Chan-wook, he is probably, I'm going to have to say, my favorite Korean director, which is a big call because of course I love his buddy that did all Parasite and Snowpiercer and films like that. They actually do have a friendship. Well, at least there's definitely a professional relationship.
Yes.
Whereas in Park has produced several of Jun Won-ho's films.
Snowpiercer.
Like Snowpiercer.
And the series.
And the series Snowpiercer, which unfortunately isn't that great. And I think maybe because of the European cast, which is, me and my kids were really excited about it. But we just couldn't get into it, which is really unfortunate because we love the movie. But there wasn't enough kind of weirdness. And I felt it just kind of got a bit muddied. And I don't know about the cast. A lot of the cast wasn't great, unfortunately.
And we're going to probably talk about some of his other films a little bit too, because we've been watching a lot in the build up to this. So
this is a little bit about his former films as well, because especially in context, most people will know Park from films like Old Boy. Maybe you've seen Thirst. If you're, you only watch sort of American films, you might have seen Stoker. He generally, though, he's quite well known for films like Old Boy. Are extremely graphic. They're violent. They're sadistic. They're quite demented. There's like a punk sort of edge to it. But yeah, a lot of dark, dry humour, which is also, Parasite has that kind of amazing dark, dry humour that really hits the spot for us.
And that's a different director.
Yeah, but just in general, Korean humour.
Oh, right. Korea,
films.
Yep.
I don't know if it's because of their friendship or it's just Korean culture in general. But there's this delicious, and it's very dry kind of humour. It's quite dark humour.
We're going to watch soon some films by Kim Ki-duk, and I don't know if that's how you say it, but he's a lot darker. He doesn't have as much humour in his films, so that'll be interesting for you to see. It's
so interesting to have like these incredibly violent, subversive, quite extreme moments interlaced with this sort of humour. And he continues to do this in Decision to Leave. There is some really funny moments, even though it's quite a serious film.
That's probably why a few people have compared him to Tarantino, because obviously Tarantino has a lot of violence and a lot of humour in his films as well.
He's so much better than Tarantino.
I think that's
can't even compare.
Tarantino's a huge fan.
Cool, yeah, of course he would be. Have to be. But given his earlier films have a reputation for being quite disturbing, really pushing the boundaries, as you can, Old Boy has some of the most boundary pushing moments you've ever seen in cinema. He goes just like head first into these topics that most people wouldn't want to touch with a barge pole. Decision to Leave, however, comes across as a very mature film. And I'm not saying his other films are immature at all. I just think that Park as a person has grown and developed, and in each of his films he kind of, you think like, how can he even, the first film of his that the earliest film of his that I've seen, which was today, we watched Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, which is 2002, and it's so well realized, it's so gorgeous, it's so complete and masterful and just very evolved in its own way.
It's quite intense too.
It's very intense.
Can I just read a quote from him about that film? I wanted to make something that felt too real. I said from the start, I want to make a film to be felt physically, not just emotionally. I wanted the audience to be tired when they finished the film. I wanted their bodies to be tired. I thought that people would love that. I like that kind of experience.
I like that he likes that. I really appreciate directors that aspire for more than, oh, that was great, we saw some explosions and there was a romance and we paid our money at the box office.
He studied to be a philosopher, or he is a philosopher, so I think that's, you can't help but notice that in his films, all of them.
Yeah, he's really into ethics, and I love the way that his characters aren't good or bad necessarily. There's a lot of grey areas, and which I think is much more realistic than setting up a hero and a protagonist or villain, those sort of black and white characters that are just so basic, I guess. He definitely doesn't dumb himself down to those sort of stereotypes at all.
He said too that he doesn't like to be thought of as an ethical director. I guess he has had a lot of people talking to him about that because of the so-called Vengeance trilogy, but he just likes to make films with characters that take that are just, I can't remember exactly how he said it, that think about their acts, their bad acts maybe.
They're introspective characters, usually very introspective, whether that introspection is forced on them or they just by nature are quite introspective. His method of storytelling takes many different forms. I think there's a lot of showing, not telling, and he kind of expects you to connect the dots. He doesn't always spell everything out, and I don't think he makes any mistakes in terms of continuity. So if something's quite a little bit different in one scene, it's because you're meant to assume that something's happened. He doesn't need to explain it, which is a little like Claire Denis. She'll often, and like Bresson often acts of great importance you don't see, which is really, really interesting. You won't see certain very important moments. It'll just skip to what's happened, and it can be quite disorientating. But I prefer that kind of storytelling that's not linear and will spell everything out for you. I find that quite just straightforward, kind of, just too easy, really.
I think his camera work is very philosophical as well. You know, it does things that are very unusual, but always for a reason.
Yeah, that's another thing. Absolutely everything in his films, all of the images he uses, everything that's in the background, there'll be a reason for that. Everything tells a story. For example, in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, there is a dummy, and I believe it's a Korean police officer's uniform, in the corner of one of the characters' rooms, and there's a big fly on the face. So I'm assuming that that's kind of like what a lot of people in the Western world, they think of pigs as police as, they call them pigs when they don't like them. I'm thinking that this fly has probably something to do with the idea that they're sort of these gross creatures. That character certainly doesn't have any love for police, and it seems like Park himself may or may not have certain feelings. I don't think he thinks that they're very good at what they do. They seem to miss a lot of things and be kind of blundering oafs in many of his films.
Everything's very thought out in his films because he's said that he always meticulously storyboards everything, all of his films, which is what Hitchcock does as well. And he got into filmmaking because he saw Vertigo.
Well, Decision to Leave made me feel like I had seen a modern day Hitchcock. It felt like almost, I suppose, like a historic event. I felt like I had just witnessed something that the audiences who first saw Vertigo and Psycho and North by Northwest and all those wonderful Hitchcock films would have felt like. I just was like, wow, you know, I love his films. In fact, I was like kind of hoping it would be quite, what's the word for it? Just kind of dark and bizarre and challenging, but actually to see this fully formed, quite mature film that he's created that really ranks up there with one of the best films of its era, I loved every part of it, even though it didn't have that kind of punky kind of boundary pushing edge, that demented kind of feeling as much.
Still does in a little bit. It's just like you said, more mature and
and the fact that this is 20 years after No Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, or Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and you know, you kind of think, how can he do any better than what he's already doing in that film? But in each of his films, it kind of grows and ripens and matures.
I far prefer his later films. Like Thirst is probably one of my favourites, or Decision to Leave and Thirst are my two favourites.
Thirst, I think, is 2009.
I'm actually not a huge Old Boy fan. I find it too violent.
bit strange for you to say because you love violent films. I think you said you found
certain
it quite
violent
macho
films
as well.
Yeah, I think that was it more. I don't like fight scenes, and I mean things like that.
Well, there's a fight scene in Old Boy which is possibly one of my favourite scenes in all of cinematic history, when the main character has just a hammer against all these men. What a scene. It took 3 days to shoot, 17 takes. It's like completely uncut. It's just one continuous take, and most of it was improvised. There's only one instance of CGI used when there's a knife being involved, but it's clumsy and it's chaotic and it's brutal, but it just doesn't have that sort of slick, sort
it's a bit like ballet or something, or opera or something.
Yes, but without it being pre-planned and sort of staged, it felt very, very, very real. And that's what I really love about his films. He makes these exquisite films, but at the same time they still have this kind of rawness to it, which is a really difficult thing to create when you're like meticulously planning everything out.
I realised I was reading something the other day about Decision to Leave, and they were comparing it to classic noir and neo-noir films like Out of the Past, Body Heat, and Basic Instinct. And it's true, because they all have, a dead husband's wife or a girlfriend or whatever,
who's a suspect,
who is a sort of a femme fatale suspect and complicates the case. I mean, they're all. I can see why people have thought of those ones.
Yeah, well, I mean, the detective in this neo-noir is actually pretty good at his job, which is maybe a little bit unusual for, he doesn't seem to like the police much, but in this case. So the main two characters is Tang Wei, who's actually Tang Wei, she's a Chinese actress. She's Sol Rei, and Park Hae-yu is Hae-jun, and so he's married. He seems to like his big job in Busan. He's a very well-respected detective, but he meets Sol Rei's character, who's apologizing for her bad Korean because she's Chinese. Is very endearing, seems slightly vulnerable, but also quite cold. And straight away, I was like, this is a neo-noir, isn't it? Oh my goodness, this is a neo-noir, which, we love. And everything sort of progresses from there. It is a long film. And a lot of the times you think, okay, this is where an ordinary film, probably an American film, would end. This would wrap it up. But then there's more.
His films are long, though. I mean, I've never seen a short film of his. They're always at least 2 hours. The Handmaiden was like 3.5 hours.
Was it?
Yeah. The version that we watched anyway.
The extended version.
Yeah.
It was a really thrilling experience, despite, I'm not going to give too much away, but no, I'm not going to give a spoiler, but I came away feeling really energized, inspired, excited. Just the experience of seeing the film was really energizing. And despite, it's a neo-noir, that there's sort of certain things that will happen. There's usually a quite predictable sort of nature of neo-noirs, or just noirs in general, but it's still full of surprises, even though it does kind of follow
his films are always very much like that.
And you've got the Chekhov's gun being 4 fentanyl capsules, which I kept thinking the whole time through how they're going to get used. The cinematography, as with all his films, is just incredible.
Yeah.
And all the little tiny small details that all of his films kind of sort of lean into. It's even more so, I think, with this film. It's very good for those observational people like me. I'm very observational. I love noticing tiny details, and it was really focusing on those things. In a way, you're kind of a detective. You're looking to see clues, and
he likes to flirt with cataloguing everyday objects and giving them space to breathe, almost as if they're made of flesh. Items such as pens, watches, and mirrors are often given centre stage, and compared with other directors, he brandishes these objects with a respect that helps deepen the characters and their often nebulous interiority. This is something I wrote, which is why it sounds so weird me reading it. But
I love your reviews, though. They're so good. That's what Nick's reviews are like. They're gorgeous, lovely to read, very exciting.
But yeah, I love how he uses objects in his films.
Yeah, I love all those small details. Scissors is a big one. Let's use scissors. The gloves and the Handmaiden. There's just so many little examples. Clocks. Yeah, there's certain things, certain motifs that keep coming through. Even the dumplings that Old Boy eats, they kind of represent his how he's been captured, because dumplings are, they're wrapped and the meat's wrapped in
that was a cool
an outside. So,
observation.
yeah, little things like that. You could analyze his films for weeks. If you'd have to dissect every single scene and really look at each scene and maybe zoom in on things, because it's all like this treasure trove of symbolism and meaning and stories being told through objects and the positioning of things and the camera angles he uses. So they're just so delightful for the observational viewer, or someone who likes to get a little bit more out of a film than just there's a background. I really enjoyed that. So Decision to Leave, I think, summarizes very well that sort of like a madness when you first fall in love with someone, that sort of obsessional, crazy feeling of falling in love. It does that very, very, very well.
I should say too, talking about other films here, in the just before, he actually has said that he wasn't thinking of any other films when he wrote Decision to Leave, as you shouldn't be as a filmmaker, really. I mean, some directors screen films, like Scorsese screens films for his actors as sort of influence, I guess. But I mean, yeah, stylistically, I saw Douglas Sirk's influence through a preoccupation with the architecture of romantic melodrama, as can Pedro Almodovar, through the film's consideration of how design characteristics conflict not only the narrative but also the characters and all their interior longings. The locations in his films are amazing, and the wallpaper, Korean wallpaper, I have developed a real thing for that after watching his films.
Even like dirty, smoke-stained, ancient
I love it.
wallpaper, you love it. Yeah, we'll have to try and track some down. Yeah. Once again, also, he revisits one of my favourite motifs of his. Is that the right word, motif?
Yeah.
Ants. It's got a thing about ants. It's brought up in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. It's brought up in Old Boy, obviously, and a little bit in Decision to Leave. So from what I've gleaned over these three films, ants are a hallucination that often people get when they feel very lonely, which is interesting. So I always think, look, whenever I see an ant, I always think about Old Boy, which is great that it's crept into my consciousness that much. And then in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, one of the characters says the ants are psychic, they know when bad things are going to happen. So I think, like, little things, the smaller creatures that Park is quite interested in, and the meaning of these little creatures. And I was always quite fascinated with insects and ants growing up. We had these lovely little black ones. These days in New Zealand, though, especially in Aotearoa, Christchurch, there are these gross little smelly red ants that are like being imported here accidentally, and they're just horrible, and they tend to displace the native ants. So I have a really weird relationship with ants in that I like the little black ones. They're cool, they can come have some sugar or whatever. Like, I'll even like feed them. But those little red stinky ones, I will like battle them and do like psychic war with those little suckers. I hate them so much.
Speaking of ants, it just made me think of that surrealist film with the eye being slit by Louis Buñuel. He said on the absurdity in his films, I don't know if you've noticed this in my films, but I think I'm influenced by Franz Kafka. I like his work very much. What would Kafka do in this scene? I don't think like that. The surrealism and the absurdity, I began to like those things because of his work.
That's so cool.
I'm reading Kafka's diaries at the moment, so
yeah, they sound really, really
very
good.
interesting to me.
This is such a wonderful kind of troubled love story. I think all of his films have these relationships in them. Some of them are very, very unusual relationships. Some of them are downright kind of wrong relationships. But I think this is like his great love story. I mean, if he was first inspired to make films by Vertigo, I think this is his Vertigo. I'm really looking forward to what he does next, but I also just don't know how the heck he can really do any better. But then with all of his films, I sort of think, how could he do any better? Yeah.
There's another thing that I wrote here about cinematography, going back to this. This is no easy feat. The long-time production designer Ryu Song-hee, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly, creates such atmospheric and emotional spaces for the characters to brood amongst that often little dialogue is needed to explain their desires or motivations. Likewise, the breathtaking cinematography of newcomer, the cinematographer is quite a new cinematographer to work with him. It Kim Ji-young adopts an astonishingly distinctive cadence from over-the-shoulder camera work during an alternately comedic and vicious foot chase between police and suspect to a particularly eerie close-up of ants crawling across the corpse's face. The thing that really impressed me is the camera that the camera is achieving things like you've never seen in any other film before. And he actually uses CGI in a very innovative way, like just to transition from shot to shot rather than like, you know, most Hollywood films use it.
Yeah, and that's one use of CGI that I don't have a problem with actually, which is very odd for me to say, but he does it so well. I love that he's used that technology for something that isn't just really shitty, crappy creature effects and things like that. Man, yeah, I'm really blown away by this director, especially like kind of revisiting some of the films that I've loved in the past, but getting to know more about him. When I started really looking into like the background of cinema in Korea, I realized his very first movie, what was it, first movie called?
Joint Security Area. Well, that's not actually his first one, it's his first successful one.
First really successful film.
He made a few films in the early 90s that weren't successful at all, which is why he got into film criticism to try and make a living.
That makes sense, yeah.
And which is where he met his wife, studying film, and they've got a daughter together.
Oh, that's nice.
And she seems very, like, she encouraged him to do Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance because he didn't want to do it because he thought everyone will kind of say, why are you making two films about vengeance in a row?
Yeah. And that was the first one. The second one was Old Boy.
Yeah, sorry. So Old Boy, and then she said, no, you should do it because it should be just whether it's a good film or not.
Yes.
And so he did it, and then lots of reporters sort of said, why did you make two in a row? And then probably because he was getting annoyed with them saying it so much, he said he's actually going to make a third one. And then he really regretted saying that, but he felt that he couldn't go back on his words, which is why he made Lady Vengeance.
Yeah, which is the one I haven't watched yet. Yeah.
It's quite a funny way to
that is funny. I like how he's so stubborn. He's like, oh, fine, I'll make a third one. But I'm sure it's very, very good. And yeah, but this revenge trilogy that he's so well known for, it wasn't an intentional thing. And it's very interesting that so basically with the success of the 1999 film, which is one we haven't watched because I want to make it part of like another video, he was basically able to make anything he wanted to. And I'm blown away that straight away he went for these like really heavy hitting issues of social inequality, of politics, of the police, of, you know, and showing like a dead child and quite graphic detail. You think Crimes of the Future is like controversial? You should see Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance.
In a different way.
In a different way, but still, it's like, this was in 2002, and it's amazing that people still loved it. And I thought Korea was quite a conservative country, not so much as Japan possibly, but I always thought of it as being fairly conservative. But considering how well his films do with their very provocative themes and images.
That's quite a new thing, as we found out today.
In the late 90s was when like a whole new era of Korean cinema began. Basically, Park is regarded as the father of modern cinema in Korea. Before that, there was like up until like the 90s, there was just like basically propaganda. A lot of films were heavily censored. They had to just be a certain way. Stories were taken from the directors, totally chopped up and changed. So that's something I'd like to actually make a whole film, a whole different video about the history of cinema in Korea and why there's been an explosion since the late 90s, essentially.
He is considered, you know, very important, but there was one film, Peppermint Flavour, I think, before him.
Yes, really want to see that.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting.
That sounds like that made some really strong headway as well into changing the way things are. I mean, to be honest, Korean media is probably the one that I consume the most of. So, you know, of course I watched Squid Game. Everybody's watched Squid Game. But I'm currently watching All of Us Are Dead, which is a really great Train to Busan style zombie high school series, which I don't know if I'd like the high school thing because it would probably be a little bit too tame, but no, it's not. It's quite gruesome. It has zombie kindergartners, which is really cool. And it also goes really deep into class structures. And I heard the term wealthy for the first time. And so wealthies is obviously like one of the worst things you can call people. It means people on welfare, people on a benefit. And that's like a huge thing in Korea that I'll cover in another video, I think. but I really appreciate Squid Game. Squid Game is all about social inequality. And the reason why that's happened is because of all sorts of factors. But yeah, it's still a really big theme, and it's fantastic that Korean directors, TV and movies, are really getting into those sort of things. It's the best way to bring these things to the light.
Less so with Japan, but Shoplifters was one.
Yeah, Japan's a lot more cagey about addressing any of those kind of issues.
It's a lot more traditional, isn't it? In a lot of ways.
Yes, I think so. But most Korean movies and TV that I've seen, Train to Busan, all those sort of big films, and Snowpiercer, of course, even though it's English language, it's all addressing this social inequality, this idea of class. So I think that's just really exciting. It kind of reminds me a bit of sort of how Kiwis are too. Like, we're funny people. We're a mixture of a lot of Western countries, and there's always been people from all sorts of different countries here from the very start. But yeah, we still have this quite colonial view of things, sadly. Yeah. But I think that Kiwis are quite... I mean, we've got a left-leaning government at the moment. I don't think it's very left, to be honest. But I think Kiwis are also quite interested in exposing those sort of societal issues, and we'll talk about it. And we have a really nasty right-wing government that, like, literally picks on beneficiaries when they want to try and win an election, and benefit bashing is seen as like a national sport here. So you've got a lot of people who are saying we've got to look after the more vulnerable members of our society, and a lot of other people that are saying let them all suffer and die. We don't care if they're disabled. We don't care what's going on for them. They're not productive. There's this one guy, Luxon, I hate to even say his name, but he talks about how people on welfare have no dignity, even if those people are disabled or they can't find work otherwise, or they're raising children, or they're looking after their grandparents, all these sorts of things. So I don't know, the passionate and the openness to discuss these sort of issues, it kind of reminds me a lot of Kiwis in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he's a more political director than most. He's even voiced his support for the Democratic Labour Party in Korea.
Good. Yeah. I just assumed that he was on the socialist side of things, democratically.
Was raised in a devout Catholic family, and describes himself as an atheist now.
Yeah, that's interesting. He certainly does tackle the Catholic Church very deliberately in Thirst. I mean, the main character is like a Catholic priest who sort of decides to start doing things that aren't very priest-like, I suppose.
Yeah. Actually, this is a good time. This is a quote from him. "Numerous times I lie in bed at night and imagine the cruelest torture. I imagine the most miserable ruining of that person's life. After that, I can fall asleep with a smile on my face. As long as it stays in the realm of imagination, the more cruel, the better. That's healthy. I'd like to recommend it to you all as well. I hope that my films can help in any small way to help your imagination to become at least a little bit more cruel."
Ooh.
That's great.
That's actually, well, a lot of people, they're working, they have terrible bosses, they have horrible people they have to work with. When I was at school, I used to fantasize someone's like burn the whole school down. I was bullied horrifically. So that's interesting, because I always felt quite guilty about having those sort of flashing thoughts.
But that's your upbringing, yeah.
No, I think it's just, I don't know, it just feels like it's kind of wrong to wish ill on other people.
No, it's your imagination.
It's your imagination.
He says,
I like that
as long as you don't act on it. And another one here, he said, "I've always tried not to fall for the lies that say things like, you can do anything if you have the will, or that you're the only one who can carve out your own life. According to the audience members' beliefs, you could call it the will of God or social systems or fate. But in the end, what I'm trying to say is the same, and that is, life doesn't go your own way."
No, and a lot of people, it's a bit like in Triangle of Sadness, where the rich people saying everyone's equal. It's like, no, it's like Luxon over here in the right-wing party. He sort of says that anybody can get to where he was. And he's like an old, white, able-bodied guy who was born into wealth, and then like ran this company quite badly. And I mean, it's just, people aren't on the same, they don't come from the same places. Things aren't equal. People, no matter how hard someone works or how well they do in life, if they're born disabled, if they're born anything other than white, if they aren't born into a wealthy family, if they can't afford to get an education is cripplingly expensive in New Zealand, by the way. It's just not the same. It's not the same playing field at all. And I actually found out that Korea doesn't have a public healthcare system, which is horrifying. So in that respect, it's a bit like America with their lack of free public health care. I was actually quite surprised to hear that, and their welfare system sounds quite, not many people get on it, and they have to be like really struggling to get on it. So I'll look into that more soon. But Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is, I think, very much about, that's when I realized that there's no free healthcare in Korea, and I went, okay, wow. So that's kind of what's the story behind what happens in the film, which is way before Breaking Bad. But and it's also, I just think a much better story overall. I really like, there's like a moment where a character dies and you don't see him dying, you only see the view of the person who's looking at him dying. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Things like that just really blow me away about his filmmaking.
Yep.
Very interesting. So it's almost like the perspective of like, if you were watching very closely, you would see that, or maybe the person who's dying would see that. And it's just I love things like that in cinema.
That's what I meant by sort of philosophical camera work, ways that sort of make you think about other people's perspectives and things.
Yeah, he does it so well. It's also the first time, I think, that maybe one of the first big roles for the actress, Bae Doona, who's she's a fantastic actress. She plays like a far left activist that clearly hates the police, and she actually plays Sun in Sense8. So a lot of Westerners will probably recognise that series. And she stars as a doctor in The Silent Sea. She's so good in this, and I didn't actually recognise it because she's so much younger in this, and she's just such a different character from what I've seen her play. But I love her, and I love that was kind of her first big film. And you've got Song Kang-ho, who plays this. Song Kang-ho plays a capitalist father to a young girl who's kidnapped by Bae Doona and Kang-woo, played by Shin Ha-kyun. So these three actors are just all very, very amazing. And Song Kang-ho, he was in The Host, Parasite, Snowpiercer by Bong Joon-ho. And he was in Thirst by Park. And he is my favourite Korean actor, male actor at least. I love him, I love his face. He's just there's something so
like
lovable about him.
Teddy bear or something.
Yes, but he can be really evil kind of sometimes as well. But there's just something about him I just adore, and it was lovely seeing him in Parasite. But he's absolutely one of my favourite actors, and he's working with Park on a lot of his films. So he's always so good. No matter what he does, he's just so good.
I was going to say that there's a use of music in this in Decision to Leave. He uses Mahler's Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony, which I'm a big fan of that piece. But he did not want to use the piece because he said it had been used to such memorable effect in Visconti's Death in Venice. But it had to be a piece of 30 minutes or more, because that's the duration of climbing up the hill of the husband. And it had to be classical because that was the husband's favourite style of music.
Decision to Leave. Yeah.
But then Park ended up asking himself, is there any law that states that only Visconti can use the piece? So he ended up using it. But I'd hate to tell Park this, but I've heard that exact same Mahler piece in about 25 or 30 films. It's just so popular to use, but I always love it because it's just such a beautiful piece of music.
I think that his one weakness, if he has any, is his scores.
Yeah,
I think his best score is in The Handmaiden, where there's a lot of original pieces by, I'll tell you when I get to it.
Man, he just needs to work with Alberto Iglesias, who's scored nearly, the majority of Pedro Almodovar's films.
Yeah, he needs a better person to work with the sound. The sound design's great, the Foley effect's fantastic, but I think his scores and the songs he chooses are a little...
Yeah, they're not that
some
great.
of them are quite over.
They're okay, but
they're not.
They're not as, they don't live up to the
rest of it.
The images and the ideas and things like that.
I think it's almost like an afterthought even in Decision to Leave, which is horrible to say, but I just don't think he has the same...
They almost feel like ads or something.
They're not that well selected. Yeah. The song in Handmaiden that I really loved was Tamako Maisuki, sung by Jo Young-wook, and he's a great composer, and the score on The Handmaiden is actually very, very good, and there are a lot of songs that were composed by this chap, Jo Young-wook, So I wish he would do more like that, because I really, really, really enjoyed the songs to the point where I was looking up what's that song, who did that, because they were just so lovely.
We're quite fussy about uses of music in films.
Yeah,
I hate
we're
it
kind of
when we're
dicks
watching
about it.
if you're watching a TV show and I just hear something that I've heard like
a million
a million other times.
I'm like, what?
Why don't they get a music supervisor to pick music that hasn't been used? There's so much music out there and so much good music to use. It just seems like they're probably doing it just so people will hear their favourite song or something. But that's
they're so overused. I can't stand it. I'm like, oh great, this song again. Like we haven't heard this song in this kind of scene a million other times.
It really puts me off a movie or a TV series if I hear something too much. But
it's very annoying. No, I find it very irritating as well. I mean, there's literally billions of songs out there. Do we really need the same old? It's like the radio stations that play the same 40 songs over and over and over. Like, why?
I'm being a bit of a hypocrite complaining though now, because I was just saying how much I love the Mahler piece that was been used in like 20 or 30 films.
Yeah, but it's just like Bach, you know. Like,
yeah, exactly.
A lot of his pieces are so gorgeous. I'm like, I don't mind hearing Bach again. Yeah. But he's not as overused. But yeah,
a couple of interesting facts here. He's inspired by the writers Kafka, who we talked about before, Shakespeare, Sophocles, and Dostoevsky, among many others. And he turned down directing Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is very interesting.
It's a really interesting film.
But then he ended up directing a TV series, The Little Drummer Girl, based on the same writer, John le Carre.
We've got that. We're going to watch that very soon. And Nick doesn't really do TV that much, but he's very excited about this one.
I am.
I'm very excited, of course.
He was also offered remaking The Evil Dead, but he turned it down. Imagine that.
That's so good. That's so up his alley. He definitely would have had tree assault and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it would have been so good. But he did do one movie, in a Western movie, Stoker, which was, when did he make that? 2013? It's got Nicole Kidman,
Mia Wasikowska,
and
Matthew Good, who was the one good thing
part
about playing Bob Evans in that Godfather, abysmal Godfather
series. But he was great, and he's great in this. I really liked it. It was visually gorgeous. It felt very different from your average American film. The use of sound, especially with these gasps and little sounds that one of the character makes, is really incredible. And there's a death scene that ends up happening in a certain film that gets revisited. Well, sort of the first time we see it is in this film, and it's sort of revisited later. It's very clever and spooky. It's interesting how he's used a similar death in two different ways, but it seems to me, maybe he's a bit fascinated with this kind of a death that involves sand. That's all I'm going to say. And I think a lot of white people a lot of the Western viewers were kind of freaked out by this and didn't like it very much, because I think it's too edgy, it's too sexual, it's too beautiful, it's too strange.
America,
it's too like a nice slow burn. So
that Florence, how do you say her last name?
Pugh.
She is in The Little Drummer Girl, which he directed, and she said that America has always had a problem with bums and tits or breasts, and that they were the producers, the American producers of that series, banned them from having any naked scenes. So they was shooting a scene with her and Alexander Skarsgård in bed, and Park keeps cutting. She'd hear cut, and you have to do it. You're showing too much breast, so do it another way. And then he was like, cut again, and said, you're acting like you're trying to hide it. And she just let me show it, because she'd been raised watching European films where she'd seen plenty of that stuff, and she's very comfortable with being naked on screen.
Yeah, I think if an actor or an actress is comfortable being naked, they should be allowed to be naked. I mean, in Thirst, it was the first scene of full frontal male nudity, I think, in cinema.
In Korea, mainstream Korea.
Yeah, it was the first full frontals, and actually was kind of like, where is it? And then right towards the end, I'm like, that'll be the moment.
It was very obvious.
It was a wee bit obvious, yeah. It was probably one of my favourite vampire films, easily. The name literally translates to bat in Korean. The guilt that happens in this film manifests in such fascinating ways. You have to see it to see what I mean.
He's a big fan of Nosferatu, and he loves Bram Stoker's Dracula, the film, Coppola, and he loves The Addiction, of course, because it's very philosophical. vampire film.
Yeah.
And he also likes the Neil Jordan film Interview with the Vampire.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. There's all these, like, the priest, gets his disease. He volunteers to be as an experimental test, and he gets this disease where he gets these horrible sort of blisters all over his face, and they reappear and from time to time. But another thing that I seem to come up quite a lot is blood types. He mentions blood types quite a lot in his films and Park's films, and this comes up a bit in the first as well. It's so gorgeous and kind of weird, but so good. It's one of his funnier films, I think. Actually, like, really especially with the guilty.
There's a cyborg one, which is
the cyborg one. Now that's totally different. Like, that's like a sort of his Tim Burton-esque film.
Quite a departure.
It feels like it's like there's not really any violence or sexual depravity or anything like that. It's very pastel hued, so it looks almost like was it Paul Thomas Anderson, the guy that does all those pretty sort of colours in his films?
Not Paul Thomas Anderson.
Who's the guy? Wes Anderson?
Wes Anderson.
I always get those two confused. So it's quite Wes Anderson.
And then there's Paul W.S. Anderson, who did Event Horizon.
That's so confusing.
Put another Paul Anderson. It is confusing.
So there's a lot of Park Kims, and there's three names in Korea, 3 or 4 names that most people have, so it'd be even more confusing.
I found some of his favourite directors and films as well, if you want to hear
a little quickie.
Yep. So he likes Antonioni's Le Not, Ms. 45 by Abel Ferrara, Bad Lieutenant by Abel Ferrara, The High and the Low, which is Akira Kurosawa, The Exorcist, of course, When a Woman Ascends the Stairs. I haven't seen that. That's a Japanese film. He likes a lot of Japanese films. Here I'm kind of picking out mainly the Western ones. Vertigo, Strangers on a Train by Hitchcock, Don't Look Now, which we watched recently, Dead Ringers, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Dead Ringers, good stuff.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original.
I quite like that film too.
Ken Russell's. You said you didn't like it.
No, I do like it, but not to the point where I would go and like visit the gas station where it originally was. Like, not that.
If I was driving through there, I'd stop. Yeah,
I'm just not like that.
If I drove.
Yeah, you don't.
Ken Russell's Marla, Taxi Driver, Alien, Johnny Guitar by Nicholas Ray, who's a favourite director of mine. The Stuntman, which is something that I haven't actually seen, but I've got it for us to watch, and I'm really keen to watch it soon, so we should definitely check that one out. Martin, which is a film I think it's by George Romero, a vampire film. It's quite a weird one, though. Cries and Whispers by Bergman, Deep Red by Dario Argento, The Exterminating Angel, which is that film with the bourgeoisie that get trapped in that room that I showed you the trailer for after we watched Triangle of Sadness.
Oh yeah, that looks.
It's hilarious. It's so good. I love the title Exterminating Angel. It's probably my favourite title for a film ever. Red Desert by Antonioni, Late Spring by Ozu, The Conformist by Bertolucci, which I'm a big fan of, Robocop.
I see Mulholland Drive down there.
Playtime by Jacques Tati.
Donnie Darko. Piano Teacher.
Rosemary's Baby and The Tenant by Polanski.
That's a good film.
Donnie
that
Darko's
one there. What's that one again? I need to see that one.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen it. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. I think it's a Japanese film.
Yeah.
I think I saw the start of it and it was like really upsetting. And I think it's the same one.
Right.
I didn't want to watch it by myself.
Yeah.
There's quite a. Yeah, I think it's about like a mother that abandons her children or something like that. It's really, because I had little kids at the time, so I was like, oh, I want to see this.
I've only got one last thing to say, which I think might interest you. He was approached by the Japanese designer of Metal Gear Solid, but after meeting with him, realised there was nothing to talk about, as Park has never played any video games. Apparently, his films, he's idolised in the world of video games. Which I kind of thought, really? Like,
I mean, I only play like a few games, but
that corridor sequence in Old Boy makes me think that's probably
games.
why.
But it's actually based on a manga, Old Boy. So, but yeah, interesting that. Yeah. Well, they are sort of ultra violent.
Yeah.
And very stylized. So yeah. Interesting. I don't like Metal Gear Solid. It's not really my kind of game. Maybe I'm just really crap at it.
I'm not a game player at all.
I love some games. Yeah, like all the Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Fallout.
Yeah, Silent Hill is like the one that I've really enjoyed playing, but I've only played it for like 2 days or something in my whole life.
I get really ceased to have my weekends with the girls, and we would stay up all night playing Silent Hill, Resident Evil, and getting freaked out and having weird dreams about running around in corridors and shooting zombies. Yeah, so The Handmaiden, I just want to quickly talk about that. We saw the extended version. There's Kim Min-hee as Lady Hideko, Kim Tae-rae as Suk-hee, Ha Young-woo as Count Fujiwara, and Cho Jin-woong as Uncle Kozuki. And it's really interesting because I love Japanese cinema, I love Korean cinema, and it kind of fuses it a little bit, which is really exciting. It's a bit of a treat for me. So at some stage, Korea was partly occupied by Japan, and so it's alluding to that time, and I think this was in the 30s, 40s maybe. It's a really interesting period in Korean history. So there's like Western buildings and Western clothing, and then there's like traditional Korean clothing and traditional Japanese clothing, and Japanese as a language and Korean, and all of those elements were just really exciting to me, because to see those two come together isn't something I've come across before. I particularly really like that, and I like the fact that there's a Chinese actress in Decision to Leave as well.
Yeah.
The music's gorgeous by Jo Young-wook, and visually it's just stunning. It's a love story, and it's really twisty. There's lots of things that are happening. I can't spoil anything. You've just really, really got to see it. And I was a little bit worried though, because there's some lesbian love scenes that I found quite beautiful, but they're pretty provocative. They're pretty raunchy. And I wondered if maybe that might be offensive to people. And,
no, it's not.
Well, I looked at, especially for Korean women, Korean lesbians. So I actually managed to find a video about this.
Reacting.
Yeah, they're quite young. They said that they weren't born in 1993, so they're a younger generation of this really gorgeous lesbian couple. They're from South Korea, and they were reacting to a scene from The Handmaiden, and they both said that they'd seen the movie quite a few times, that they loved it. In fact, one of them said that the scene makes her heart beat, which is a quite a poetic way of saying it. And they said that, yes, it has a lot of sex, but it's not offending at all, but beautiful. So that's the quote. So I thought, well, I know they're only one couple, and they're from the younger generation, but I feel like if they were okay with it, if they thought it was well done and it wasn't too, like, overt. I mean, I thought
films are always going to offend some people and be beautiful to other people, though.
But luckily,
that's what's so great about films.
Yeah, luckily the South Korean lesbian couple thought it was all good. So I thought it was just so beautiful, and I thought it was one of the most lovely, interesting, satisfying love stories I've ever seen, ever. And the two actresses that play the main characters, so beautiful and so interesting. So yeah, that was this last film, I think, before Decision to Leave, maybe, and it is so
I actually saw it at the New Zealand International Film Festival a couple of years ago.
So jealous.
It's like three years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
I really regret not really scouring sort of anything, all the cinemas to see if any of his films were being shown, because we don't see a lot of international films in New Zealand. Sometimes Parasite, that was, but still.
It would have been hard to know. It was shown at Hoyt's Northlands.
Yeah, that's
so weird. And there's a one-off screening.
But if you ever get the chance to see one of Park's films on the big screen, just do it. I just put my credit card on. But yeah, it's totally worth the expense, because his films are just such an experience. And if there's just so much of a wonderful experience on a smaller screen, I can only imagine what they're like on the big screen. I mean, Decision to Leave, so glad I saw that on the big screen. I really want to see it again, actually, but I might be more careful about, like, you want to plan beforehand, make sure you don't drink anything when you're in there, and go to the toilet before you go in, because otherwise you'll be wriggling around, and you don't want to have to get up during the film. So it's quite a long film, but just fantastic, and it's so exciting to see where he's gone. And even though he's always just been so good and so well realized and so perfect in many ways, he still continues to up the game on his films, and I just think that's remarkable. Yeah,
he's working on a TV show at the moment called The Sympathizer, 3-part miniseries. So I'm very, very keen to see that. He's
one of the few Korean directors I think's managed to kind of make that crossover into Western films and series and do quite a... Snowpiercer is a bit of an exception because he only really produced that. But I think that the one that he did the 4-part with Florence Hugh.
The Little Drummer Girl.
Little Drummer Girl. I mean, that seems pretty well acclaimed.
Yeah, people like it, and it's rated quite highly. It is a very hard thing to do. If you're really well known and doing something in your language, then you suddenly decide to do something else. I'm very excited about Pedro Almodovar doing Lucia Berlin's A Manual for Cleaning Woman.
Yeah.
You didn't like when I showed you that, because I really love her writing.
I'm not so big on her writing.
But he did, he did a short film with Tilda Swinton that was really good. But I can see why he's doing it, because he wants to remain respectful to the writing. And but he did Yulita based on Alice Munro's writing, and that was in Spanish. So he doesn't need to do it in English. But
it's always a little bit risky when someone who's not a native English speaker crosses over into English speaking TV and movies. But I think he can do it. I really like what he did with Stoker. I'm gutted that it wasn't more well received, because it was really cool. Oh, there's one scene that I had to rewind a couple of times in Stoker where it's sort of hair's being brushed, and the hair goes from hair to this sort of straw and then grasses, and it's this beautiful transition. So, man, he's just a master visually in so many ways.
Again, he's like someone like Kiyoshi Kurosawa that doesn't have a book written about him in English.
What?
Or one that's currently in stock.
Yeah.
Or currently in print. So that's crazy.
It's crazy. We might have to remedy that. I would certainly be well interested in being involved with something like that.
His interviews are really, really cool. He needs just a book of his interviews at least, because they're like his films. They're very philosophical and very humorous. And
yeah, he's such an interesting person. You really enjoyed doing some research.
I did.
One, didn't
you?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want more. I want more. Luckily, there are more. So that's what we're going to be doing more, and I'll come out with another video about the whole history of Korean cinema at some stage as well. Well, it was lovely to see you again. Hope you enjoyed
What are you going to rate it?
Oh, what? Decision to Leave. Well, shit. 5 out of 5 hearts. I mean, how could you not?
I'd give it 4.5.
That's very high for you. I'd rate pretty much all of its films 5 out of 5, to be honest. I just love them all so much. I haven't seen a bad film. They're all so perfect. They're emotional without being sentimental. They get to you without doing all the sort of gross things that directors usually do to try and manipulate your emotions. They're just like drinking water when you're thirsty. That's what they feel like for the mind and the body. So 9.5 hearts.
That's pretty good.
Out of 10 hearts for Decision to Leave, and see all his films. They're all great. There's no bad ones.
And we have no idea what we're doing next week, so
no. We've had a big week this week.
We'll see you then, though.
See you all later. Bye.
Bye.